410. I was 28 years old when I learned that being the responsible child means you're the one who gets sacrificed. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was fixing fence posts on the Henderson property, my hands raw from wire and wood. Mr. Clayton's voice was steady, businesslike, but I could hear the respect underneath. He wanted me as his ranch manager. $120,000 a year, full benefits, housing included on his 1,200-acre spread in Montana. It was everything I'd worked toward for 10 years, every early morning, every late night, every lesson learned from men twice my age who saw something in me worth teaching. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes after that call, staring at nothing, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Hope, real, tangible hope that I could finally build something of my own, that all those years of proving myself hadn't been wasted. I called my mom before anyone else, expecting her to be proud, expecting her to finally see that her middle son had made something of himself. Her first words were not congratulations. They were about my brother Jake. Jake, who was 3 years younger, who had worked maybe half the hours I had, who showed up late and left early, who somehow always had an excuse that Mom accepted without question. She told me Mr. Clayton's ranch needed someone reliable, someone the family could be proud of, and wouldn't it be wonderful if Jake had this opportunity instead? After all, he needed it more than I did. I was always fine, always capable of landing on my feet. But Jake, well, Jake needed help finding his direction, and wasn't that what family was for? I should have said no right then. Should have told her that this was my opportunity, my career, my life. But guilt is a powerful thing when it's been cultivated since childhood. Mum had a way of making you feel selfish for wanting anything that might leave someone else behind, especially if that someone else was Jake. Dad had passed 5 years earlier, and in his absence, Mum's protectiveness toward my younger brother had grown into something unhealthy, something that twisted normal family loyalty into a weapon. That evening, I drove to the family house, the same ranch-style home where we'd all grown up on the outskirts of town. Mom had dinner ready, pot roast like she always made on Tuesdays, and Jake was already there, sitting at the table with that easy smile he always wore, the one that said life had never really been hard for him. Mom served us both, but her eyes were on me the whole time, measuring, calculating. She started talking about Jake's recent struggles. He'd lost his job at the feed store 3 months ago, something about inventory discrepancies, though she framed it as a personality conflict with the manager. She talked about how hard it was for young men these days to find good work, how the economy was tough, how Jake just needed the right opportunity to show what he was capable of. I ate my pot roast and said nothing, feeling the trap closing around me with every word. Jake didn't even look uncomfortable. He just ate, nodding along, occasionally adding how much he'd always loved working with cattle, how he'd always dreamed of ranch management. I wondered if he actually believed his own revision of history. The conversation stretched past dinner into the living room, where Mom served coffee and continued her campaign. She talked about family legacy, about how proud Dad would have been to see one of his sons running a major ranch operation. She carefully avoided mentioning that I'd been the one actually working ranches since I was 16, that I'd been the one who stayed close to help her after Dad died, that I'd been the one building the reputation that had gotten me this offer in the first place. Instead, she focused on opportunity, on how this could be Jake's turning point, his chance to finally settle down and make something of himself. I looked at my younger brother, waiting for him to say something, to acknowledge that this was my opportunity, that maybe he should step back and let me have this one thing. But Jake just looked hopeful, eager even, like a kid waiting to open Christmas presents. He asked me about Mr. Clayton, about the ranch, about what the job would entail. He talked about it like it was already his, like we were just discussing details of his new position. Mum encouraged him, answered questions I should have been answering, painted pictures of his future success. Around midnight, Mum played her final card. She got quiet, got that look in her eyes that meant she was about to say something designed to cut deep. She told me she'd been having trouble sleeping lately, worrying about Jake, worrying about his future. She said it would give her such peace of mind to see him settled, to know that both her sons were doing well. She looked directly at me and said that I'd always been strong enough to take care of myself, but Jake needed family support. She needed me to do this for her, for the family, for my brother. I called Mr. Clayton the next morning. My hands shook while I dialed, and I hated myself for it, hated the weakness that made me do what I was about to do. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and welcoming. He started talking about move-in dates, about introducing me to his current staff, about his vision for the ranch's future and my role in it. I let him talk for a minute, feeling each word like a door closing on the life I could have had. Then I stopped him. I told him I appreciated the offer more than he could know, but I couldn't accept the position. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, become more careful. He asked if it was the salary, if there was something else I needed. I almost broke then, almost told him everything. Instead, I told him I had family obligations that made relocation impossible. It was technically true, just not in the way he would understand. He pushed back, gently but firmly. He told me he'd been watching me work for 2 years, that he'd talked to every rancher I'd ever worked for, that he'd specifically wanted me because of my skill, my work ethic, my natural leadership with both animals and men. He said opportunities like this didn't come often, that I should think carefully before turning it down. I told him I already had, that my decision was final. Then I did something that felt like self-mutilation. I recommended my brother Jake instead. I told him Jake had similar experience, had grown up around ranches, would be perfect for the position. I gave Mr. Clayton my brother's number. The silence after I hung up felt like death. I sat in my truck outside the hardware store where I'd pulled over to make the call and felt something fundamental shift inside me. I'd just given away the biggest opportunity of my life, handed it to someone less qualified, less dedicated, less deserving, all because I couldn't stand up to my mother's guilt trips. I told myself I was being a good son, a good brother, but deep down, I knew I was being a coward. Jake got the call that afternoon. I heard about it from Mom, who called me crying with joy, telling me how proud she was. How this was exactly what Jake needed, how I'd done such a wonderful thing for the family. She kept saying that I'd always been her rock, her strong one, the son she could always count on to do the right thing. I wondered when doing the right thing had started meaning sacrificing my own life for someone else's convenience. Mr. Clayton must have done his due diligence, must have called Jake's references, must have interviewed him. I wondered what Jake had told him, what stories he'd spun about his ranch experience. But whatever he said, it was enough. 2 weeks later, Jake moved to Montana to start his new job as ranch manager of the Clayton property. Mom threw him a going-away party, invited all the relatives, made his favorite foods. Everyone congratulated him, told him how proud they were, what a great opportunity this was. Several people mentioned how lucky he was to have a brother who'd helped him get his foot in the door. Nobody seemed to notice that I barely spoke the entire evening. The first few months after Jake left were strange. I kept working the same jobs I'd been working, smaller ranches, temporary positions, nothing with real growth potential. The work was good, honest, but it felt hollow now, like I was going through motions in someone else's life. I avoided Mom's calls more often than I answered them, made excuses about being busy, about having to work late. The truth was, I couldn't stomach hearing her talk about how well Jake was doing, how proud she was, how right this had all turned out to be. Jake called me exactly once in those first 3 months, and the conversation was brief and awkward. He thanked me for the recommendation, said the ranch was bigger than he'd expected, the work harder, but he was managing. There was something in his voice, though, something uncertain, maybe even overwhelmed. But I didn't push. I didn't want to hear about his struggles with the job that should have been mine. I told him I was glad it was working out and found an excuse to hang up. I started picking up work farther from home, spending more time away, sleeping in my truck or cheap motels, rather than dealing with the constant reminders of what I'd given up. Other ranch hands would talk about their plans, their dreams of moving up, maybe becoming managers themselves someday. I'd nod and smile and say nothing about the fact that I'd already been offered that dream and thrown it away. Some nights, alone in my truck under Montana stars on some stranger's property, I'd let myself imagine what my life would look like right now if I'd just said yes, if I'd chosen myself for once. 5 months after Jake started at Clayton Ranch, my phone rang at 6 in the morning. It was Mr. Clayton himself. My first thought was that something had happened to Jake, an accident, an injury. I answered with my heart pounding, and his first words were not what I expected. He asked me if I could come to the ranch that day. He said he needed to talk to me in person. His voice was calm but serious, with an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. I told him I'd be there by noon. The drive to Clayton Ranch took 4 hours, and every mile felt heavier than the last. I hadn't been back since Jake took the position, hadn't wanted to see him living the life I should have had. The ranch looked exactly as I remembered it, sprawling and beautiful, with mountains rising in the distance and cattle dotting the green pastures. I pulled up to the main house, and Mr. Clayton was waiting on the porch, his weathered face unreadable. He offered me coffee, and we sat, and then he told me something that made my blood run cold. Jake had been fired the day before. He explained it carefully, methodically, like a man who'd thought through every word. The problems had started within the first month. Jake showed up late consistently, left early when he thought nobody was watching. He made decisions without consulting the senior ranch hands who'd been there for decades, decisions that cost money and endangered livestock. He'd ordered the wrong feed twice, miscalculated medication dosages, left gates open that allowed valuable breeding stock to mix with commercial cattle. There were complaints from the staff, from neighboring ranchers, from vendors. Mr. Clayton had given him chances, offered additional training, assigned mentors. Nothing changed. Mr. Clayton continued, and his words painted a picture that didn't surprise me as much as it should have. Jake had been defensive when confronted about mistakes, blamed others, made excuses. He'd developed a pattern of disappearing during crucial times, being unreachable when problems arose. The final straw had come 3 days earlier when Jake had taken the ranch truck into town on a Friday night, gotten drunk at a bar, and been pulled over on the way back. No DUI, thankfully, but he'd been driving a vehicle with Clayton Ranch logos all over it, representing the operation while intoxicated. That, combined with everything else, was enough. Mr. Clayton looked at me across his porch table with something like regret in his eyes. He told me he'd made a mistake. He'd wanted to give Jake a chance based on my recommendation, had trusted my judgment about my brother's capabilities. But it had become clear within weeks that Jake wasn't ready for this level of responsibility. Might never be. The senior staff had been asking questions, wondering why Mr. Clayton had passed over me, the one they'd all expected to get the job, in favor of someone so obviously unprepared. He said he owed me an apology for doubting his first instinct. Then he offered me the job again, same salary, same benefits, same opportunity. But this time there was a caveat. He needed to know why I'd turned it down the first time, why I'd recommended someone I must have known wasn't qualified. He said he couldn't bring me on as manager if he couldn't trust my judgment, and right now, that recommendation called everything into question. He asked me directly, had I been trying to sabotage his operation? Had there been some grudge, some reason I'd wanted him to fail? I sat there on that porch, feeling everything I'd buried for 5 months rise up like a flood. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I told the truth. I told him about my mother's guilt campaign, about the family pressure, about being raised to believe that being strong meant sacrificing for others, especially for Jake. I told him about my father's death and how it had changed the family dynamics, how Jake had become the one who needed protection, needed opportunities handed to him, while I became the one expected to be fine with whatever was left over. I told him I'd known Jake wasn't qualified, that I'd done it anyway because I was too weak to stand up to my family, too conditioned to put others first regardless of the cost to myself. I said it was the biggest mistake of my life, that I regretted it every single day, but that I understood if he couldn't trust me after that. I told him I wouldn't blame him for rescinding the offer, that I'd proven I couldn't make tough decisions when it mattered, and that was a fatal flaw in a ranch manager. Mr. Clayton listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He told me about his own brother, about a similar dynamic in his family growing up, about how he'd spent years trying to help someone who didn't want to be helped, who took every opportunity and squandered it. He said he recognized the pattern, understood the pressure, but that there was a difference between making one mistake under duress and making it a habit. He asked me if I'd learned from this experience. I told him yes, that I'd learned the hardest way possible that enabling someone doesn't help them. It just delays their inevitable reckoning while destroying your own life in the process. I told him I'd learned that family loyalty shouldn't mean self-destruction, that being strong sometimes means saying no, especially to people you love. I told him that if he gave me this chance, I wouldn't waste it. Wouldn't let family pressure interfere with my professional judgment again, wouldn't confuse kindness with weakness. He studied me for what felt like an eternity. Then he held out his hand and said the job was mine if I wanted it. I shook his hand, and something fundamental shifted back into place inside me. We discussed start dates, responsibilities, the current state of the operation after Jake's tenure. Mr. Clayton was frank about the work ahead. Jake had created problems that needed fixing, relationships that needed mending, systems that needed rebuilding. The senior staff was skeptical, waiting to see if I was cut from the same cloth as my brother, or if I was actually the man they'd thought I was 2 years ago. It would be an uphill battle to prove myself, harder than it would have been if I'd just taken the job the first time. I told him I understood, that I welcomed the challenge, that I'd rather have a difficult opportunity than no opportunity at all. We spent the rest of the afternoon walking the property, discussing specific issues, meeting with key staff members. I could see the relief in their faces when Mr. Clayton introduced me as the new manager, could feel them measuring me, wondering if I'd be worth the trust they were tentatively offering. I made a silent promise to every one of them that I would be. That evening, I sat in my truck in the ranch parking area and called my mother. She answered cheerfully, started talking about her week, asked about my work. I interrupted her and told her about Mr. Clayton's offer, about Jake being fired, about my decision to accept the position this time. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then she started talking, and it was exactly what I'd expected. How could I take a job my brother had just lost? Didn't I care about his feelings? Wasn't I being selfish? This would humiliate Jake, would destroy his confidence, would damage our family. I let her talk until she ran out of steam. Then I said something I should have said 6 months ago. I told her that Jake's problems were his own, that he'd failed because of his choices and his lack of work ethic, not because of bad luck or a personality conflict. I told her that enabling him, protecting him from consequences, making excuses for him had done him no favors. It had created a man who couldn't handle responsibility, couldn't accept criticism, couldn't grow. I told her I loved her, but I was taking this job, and if she couldn't support that, I'd understand, but I wouldn't change my mind. She tried guilt, tried anger, tried pleading. She said I was betraying my brother, abandoning the family, choosing money over love. She said my father would be disappointed in me, which was a low blow that stung, even though I knew it wasn't true. Dad had valued hard work and integrity above all else. He would have understood this decision, maybe been proud of me for finally making it. I told her I had to go, that I'd call her when I was settled, and I hung up before she could say anything else. Jake called 10 minutes later. His voice was different than I'd ever heard it, raw with anger and something else underneath. Hurt maybe, betrayal. He asked me how I could do this to him, take his job, humiliate him like this. I told him I wasn't taking his job, he'd lost it on his own merit, and I was accepting an offer made to me independently. He said that was semantics, that everyone would see it as me replacing him, stepping over him, proving I was better. I told him that wasn't my intention, but if that's how it looked, maybe that's because it was true. He said things then that probably ended our relationship as brothers. He called me selfish, called me a backstabber, said I'd always been jealous of him, always looked down on him. He said I'd set him up to fail by recommending him for a job I knew he couldn't handle, just so I could swoop in and play hero later. That one almost made me laugh. I told him if he truly believed that, he didn't know me at all. I told him he'd had every advantage, every chance to succeed, and he'd failed because he wasn't willing to put in the work, wasn't willing to learn, wasn't willing to accept responsibility. Those were his choices, not mine. He hung up on me. I sat there with the dead phone in my hand, feeling oddly empty. I'd just burned bridges with my family, alienated my mother and brother, chosen my career over familial peace. Part of me felt guilty, that old conditioning rising up to whisper that I'd been selfish, that I should have found another way. But another part, a newer, stronger part, felt something different. Relief, freedom. The sense that I'd finally chosen myself. I started as ranch manager of Clayton Ranch 2 weeks later. The work was exactly as hard as Mr. Clayton had warned. There were systems to rebuild, trust to earn, mistakes to correct. Some of the staff were welcoming, others coldly professional, waiting to see if I'd prove myself or fail like Jake had. I threw myself into it completely, worked 16-hour days, learned every aspect of the operation, listened to the experienced hands who'd been there for decades. I made mistakes, admitted them, fixed them, learned from them. Slowly, gradually, the ranch began to respond. 6 months in, we had our first profitable quarter in a year. The staff started relaxing around me, joking, offering suggestions without being asked. Mr. Clayton told me he'd made the right choice, that he should have trusted his instincts the first time. I told him everything had worked out the way it needed to. I'd needed to learn that lesson, hard as it was, about standing up for myself, about recognizing the difference between family loyalty and self-destruction. I'd needed to hit bottom before I could climb back up. My mother and I eventually started speaking again, though our relationship would never be what it was. She couldn't forgive me for what she saw as abandoning Jake, and I couldn't pretend